Rajesh, and I've been with eSavvy for about a year now. Some of you might know me, for others, I've been with the Microsoft CRM product since 1.2, not as long as Guy has been in the product for, but then, yeah, I have seen the product evolve, and one of the functionalities of the feature set which has actually grown in stature is the workflows. And what I would like to do today is to see and show you how we can utilize workflows to improve your business productivity. Now, through the session, I'll take you through some examples and then also show you a small demo on how we can utilize workflows, which will be specific to a certain scenario. But then I think by the end of the session, you would probably be getting an overview of how you can utilize workflows in your own scenarios. I understand that this is going to be the last session for lunch, so I'm the only one who's standing between you and your lunch, so I'll try to make it short, and let's kickstart then. Alright, we'll take a look at what are workflows in CRM, take you through some scenarios where we could probably use workflows and have your mind thinking about how you can use workflows. We'll go one step further and see what's the different trigger events which can trigger a workflow in CRM, which is going a little technical. So you'll see what are the possible actions you can take using your workflows, how can you automate using workflows. Then as I said, we'll have the demo. And once you understand what a workflow can do, I think it's important that you understand what are the limitations of the workflow as well, because this is not a sales pitch, so I need to also let you know what are the limitations of a workflow when compared to some of the other functionalities you have, in terms of automating your CRM system. We'll take a look at some of the best practices. That's basically, over the years, I've seen the workflow being used by different companies, and I've seen how and where people can actually go wrong. So there are, certain areas which you need to take care of so that you can have the workflow work for you as you actually expect it to do. At the end of it, we'll have a session on, we'll have some time for questions. Okay, so what are workflows in CRM? Basically, most of you would have heard the word BPM or Business Process Management, right? So workflows in CRM or in Microsoft Dynamics CRM allow you to automate some or part of your business process, or probably also processes which are, where you're interacting with your customers, or it could also be processes which are purely internal to your own organization. Now, when you say automation, it obviously means that you're reducing the effort or reducing the time that your employees or users have to spend on certain tasks. Now, it could be that you have a lot of repetitive tasks or a lot of administrative tasks which your employees or users are expected to do or are forced to do. And where a workflow could come and help you is by automating certain things so that they can concentrate on what they have to do as part of their business role and not really worry about all the other surrounding stuff. So if you look at reducing manual effort, it obviously means you're looking at improving on the efficiency of your business, and at the end of it all, we expect improved customer experience and also higher satisfaction as far as customers are concerned. Now, I have sales, service and marketing put up on the board here, but these are the three core pillars on which CRM system is built on. Now, there are customers who use Microsoft CRM not just for these three, but have actually extended the CRM system, because most of you have heard of the term XRM, so people have actually extended the system to cater to other departments, if I may call so. Now, these are different examples which are here, and if you look at, like, for example, sales, and if you want to route sales leads, now it could be that you have a lot of information captured as part of your lead screen, basically a prospect, and you may have different attributes on a lead to say this is the industry from which this lead comes in, or this is the annual revenue of the company that the lead represents, or whatever conditions. And then what you could do is in the background have a workflow or a rule set up so that it actually checks for different conditions and then routes it to the appropriate salesperson, the BDM, who's actually looking after that particular industry or that particular territory. Now, it could be that you have, as an organization, different needs based on different conditions. So it's easy enough to actually tailor the Microsoft CRM workflow engine to do certain tasks or automate actions for you. Now, moving on to service. Now, Garmin is the prime example of where service is at the forefront of their CRM operations. Now, you could look at SLA management, service agreement management. You could look at contract management. So the system can actually, let the right person know that a particular contract is going to expire, let's say 2 weeks in advance or 1 month in advance. So what it helps you to do is to think of your work and just not be bothered about all such things where you have to keep track of additional items. Looking at marketing, you could look at budgeting for campaigns, for example. So I don't know if most of you have used CRM for campaigns and management of marketing campaigns, but you have the option to track the cost involved at different activities. Now, for example, if Daniel was to use CRM for managing such an event like this, he could have different activities and have a cost associated with each of those activities to say that, booking a room in Microsoft is going to cost me this much, or ordering, catering service is going to cost me this much. And once the total cost is calculated by the workflow, it could actually send out an email to David to say that, you've already reached 75% of your budget. That's where workflows add value to your business. Okay? Now, as I said, we'll go one level deeper to the technical side of the workflows as well. Now, under scope, you have user, business unit, organization, parent, child, business unit. So people who are familiar with Microsoft CRM would know that these are the different levels you can set up. So if I have a workflow which is configured to run at the organization level, it means that whatever actions and trigger points are defined on that workflow will be applicable to all users across the organization. Okay? But in some cases, I might have different processes applicable to different business units or different departments within the same company. So I might have a training department which is having a specific workflow. So I could actually create a workflow and run it at the training business unit level. So if I have users who belong to a particular business unit, all those user actions will actually ensure that only certain workflows are run or certain workflows are executed, and it doesn't affect any other user who is from a different business unit, because you don't want the same process to be for that particular business unit also. The last one is the user level, which means even though you have a lot of workflows set up by your system administrator or your system customizer, you as an individual might be actually following certain ways of doing things, the way that that way it is going to help you in your work. So what you can do is you can, if you have the required privileges, create your own workflows as an end user. So you could be creating a workflow which makes it, let's say you have an appointment with a particular lead or a particular person. Now you could have the workflow configured in such a way that it automatically creates a task, let's say 1 day before the actual appointment is supposed to take place, which means you can have tasks come up in your Outlook calendar. Now that's something which you can do as an individual. So you could create a workflow so that you don't forget about this meeting, and you can actually plan that meeting 1 day in advance itself. So that's what scope defines as far as the workflow is concerned. The triggers, now you can have automatic workflows which are triggered based on certain events. So if you look at create, for example, so what that means is essentially you could write or configure a workflow which is triggered when a particular event, a particular record is created. That's what create means here. Or when a record's status changes. So you may have different processes which need to be triggered based on these status changes. Like for example, when a case is resolved or when an opportunity is won. So you may have workflows trigger which can actually notify another person to say that an opportunity has been won, or you want an email to be sent to the manager of the person who's actually sold a certain product or service of yours. You could actually have the workflow do it for you. Now, you could also trigger workflows manually. So there are times when you want to run a workflow by triggering it from a user's point of view. So you don't really have to rely on events and rely on automatic workflows. You could also have the possibility of triggering a workflow manually. So there are certain scenarios under which you would actually go ahead and configure a manual workflow. You could also have workflows when a record is assigned to another person. Just to, let's say, for example, you have an opportunity which has come in, but you think you're not the right person to work with that opportunity, and it has to be sent to another person. So you would, in the CRM system, go ahead and assign that opportunity to another person. Now, the other person can actually either be always in front of a CRM system and keep looking at the opportunities that have been assigned to him, or you could, in the background, have a workflow which will automatically trigger an email to that second person so that he knows that a new opportunity is on his way. Right? So that's how you could use your workflows. The actions, so what are the things that a workflow can do for you? It can actually create a new record or update, delete, basic crude operations. You could send an email using the Microsoft workflow engine, or you could change the status of certain records. So it's all dependent on your different processes. So you have the ability to do one of those items there. And at the end of it, you can see check condition and wait condition. So these are two checks which are carried out by the CRM workflow engine. So you could actually have the workflow wait for a particular time period, and then, you know, like for example, if you want to have a case resolution within 2 days, and if you've seen that the case has not been resolved within those 2 days, you can have the workflow wait for 2 days after the case has been created, and then send out an email to the case owner to say that this is a high priority case, it's still not being resolved. So basically allowing you to automate a lot of these processes, right? I'll quickly take you through a demo where the scenario is basically a local city council who have implemented a case management solution where citizens have actually got the ability to raise issues, and it's for the council to actually go through the different cases that come in and then take appropriate actions in time. Let's just switch over to, when I save the case record, what I have in the background is a workflow which is triggered on the create case event, okay? And this is where you define your workflow. So just switching to the screen, I have a workflow which is called case creation. Let me just open that up for you. This is where you would configure your workflows. It's a pretty simple interface. So I define what's the name of the process. I have chosen it to be run on demand as well as when a record is created. So it's for the case entity, and I say that this workflow has to be triggered when a case record is created. And what am I doing here in this workflow? So as we saw, I just filled in the name of the customer and I specified the subject on the case record. Now the first step here that I want the workflow to do is to check if the customer name has been populated on the case form. And if it has been done, what I'm going to do is to update the case record with the email address and the phone number of the customer. So your help desk agent or your customer service agent simply specifies the name of the customer, and in the background I'm having the workflow automatically populate a couple of fields which are related to that customer chosen. Alright, so that's how you can automatically fill in information without actually having to waste the time of the agent. Right? So I do that and I click on the view properties. This is just a workflow which is active, which means I cannot go and modify any of these fields, but the way I've done it is on the case record I see a form here which is basically the case form, and I've actually chosen to fill in the email address and the phone number of the customer based on the customer chosen. So as you can see, it's something which is pretty easy, and it's something which you can change if at all your business process evolves and changes in time. Okay, so let's close this off. And in addition to that, what I've done is I've actually routed the case to the specific department within the council which is supposed to take care of, let's say, public safety issues. So I can have a department manager always monitoring the queue, which is another functionality within the CRM system, and I can have people automatically look at that queue, because every time a case is created for that particular subject line, I am forcing it to be pushed into a queue. So that's what I'm doing. And then the last step is, if it is a high priority case, I'm actually running a child workflow. Now what does the child workflow do? The child workflow is actually keeping track of the time that the case has been registered, and then it's waiting for a couple of days. Because it's a high priority case, it waits for 2 days and then checks for the status of the case again, and then notifies whoever is required to be acting on that case. Right? So I'm not doing anything manually here, it's all done through the workflow automation. If I click on the child workflow, basically a child workflow is used to do the repetitive tasks. So I'm using the workflow to actually wait for 2 days and then always check on the status of the case. If it is active, send an email, and I can do this any number of times. Alright, so once the workflow encounters the step which says check the status of the case, if the case has been resolved, then the CRM workflow does not send the email. Okay, so I stop the workflow as a successful one. So that's how I can manage my process using a workflow and then having a child workflow under the main workflow. Now I'll close the workflow process designer and go back to the case form. So on the case record, I will refresh the case record and see if the customer email and the customer phone numbers have been filled up. So as you can see, the workflow has been acting, and it has actually filled up these 2 fields for me, right? And if you look at workflows here, now CRM allows you to monitor workflows on a particular record from within the record itself. So in case you think that certain actions have to take place, but if you think the expected outcome has not come in, you could actually go on to the workflows section here and see why is it that a particular workflow is not fired as per your expectation. So I can see 3 workflows here, one which says it's succeeded and the others which are waiting. Now the one that has succeeded is the one which has actually filled in the email address and the telephone number for me, but the ones which are waiting are the ones which are to wait for 2 days, right? And it's not 2 days yet, so it will wait for 2 days and then carry out the required action for me. So that's how the workflows work. Okay, I hope you are getting the gist of the workflow system. So now going back to our presentation. Now that you've seen what a workflow can do, there are certain limitations as well as advantages of going for a CRM workflow. It is, as you saw, a no-code solution. So you could have an end user create a workflow for you in no time. You don't really need to depend on a developer or a .NET developer to actually do something for you. It is a no-code solution, but at the same time you still have the option to add some code within the workflow if need be. So there are times when you might end up having to kick off a workflow, and in between you have to actually use .NET assemblies to finish off the workflow. It can be triggered on most of the common events that you come across, or create or update or delete or whatever actions, and that will help you to trigger a workflow. It is easily configurable. It is an asynchronous operation. So what it means is it does not actually execute as and when somebody clicks on a button. For example, you create a case, you hit on the save button, right? The workflow is triggered only after the save operation is completed by the CRM system. It cannot validate that the information that you've entered on the case form is correct and hence prevent the save. It happens only after the save action is completed. So it is an asynchronous operation. The good thing is that even if you have a lengthy process kicking off in the background, the user doesn't have to wait for that process to be completed, to see the case being saved, right? So he clicks on save action happens, and that is when your workflow is triggered, right? If you look at the limitation section, asynchronous operation is there as well, because as I said earlier, you cannot prevent the user from saving a record or from deleting a record using a workflow. The workflows are triggered only after the action has hit the CRM platform, right? What is it? Okay, there are certain events for which you cannot trigger a workflow. For example, if you merge a couple of records, so you find that there are two contacts which are more or less similar, so you merge them and then deactivate one of the records. Now, you cannot have a workflow triggered on such an action. There are certain limitations to the events that you can trigger a workflow on. And okay, the last one, no control over the order in which each workflow runs or executes. Now, there are scenarios where you might end up having to write two different workflows for the same event. So for example, on case create, I have workflow 1 which does XYZ, and I have workflow 2 which does ABC. Now, I cannot control which of these workflows are going to be executed first, even though the event is the same event, right? So you have to be very careful when you compose workflows or configure workflows and ensure that you don't have any sort of overlap. It has to be tested thoroughly, which brings me to the next slide, which is the best practice. So you have to really test your workflows, because you can very easily end up with infinite loops here. Now, as you saw, child workflows which are now waiting for 2 days to run, I could, with some bad logic within my workflow, actually choke up the CRM server and its performance, because you might end up with an infinite loop pretty easily. There are some inbuilt mechanisms that Microsoft provides. So what it does is it checks to see if a particular step is being run 7 times in a minute. If it is more than 7 times in a minute, the Microsoft system itself stops you from executing that workflow, and that workflow actually pauses. So which means it gives you an opportunity to go and find out what is the problem with the workflow, and then correct it, and then resume the workflow. Okay? Another option that you can do is to delete the completed workflow jobs. So as and when you configure a workflow, if I can go back to the process, on every workflow record, you have the option to delete the workflow instance once that instance has been completed. So there you go. So it says at the bottom, automatically deleted completed jobs. Now, this saves you disk space. So you might, as you can think, have a lot of workflows running depending on the number of records that you're interacting with. And if you choose this option to automatically delete the completed jobs, that's going to save you this space. Going back to the presentation. Right, and the last one is obviously to monitor the workflows. So you could do that at the system level, where you see a view for system jobs. And you could also go into the individual records and see workflows, as we just saw from the left-hand side. So that wraps up my presentation. So do you guys have any questions on workflows, how it can be used, or anything else? Any questions? No?
Okay, so that's it for the sessions for today.